We're going to be going over Sapphire 10, Cutting Edge Motion Graphics with BCC 10, Sapphire 10, and Mocha Pro 5. John Dickinson is a designer, trainer, and presenter from motionworks.net. John is from Sydney, Australia. He's a motion graphics designer, trainer, and presenter specializing in Adobe After Effects and Maxon Cinema 4D. With Motionworks, John combines 19 years of industry experience with a proven teaching ability. We're really excited about what he's going to show you today. Your co-hosts today are Brian Fox. He's the Director of Product Marketing at Boris FX. Peter McCauley. He's our Senior Product Manager at Boris FX. And I am Mary Poplin, your Product Specialist at Imagineer Systems and Boris FX. Join us online at borisfx.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Vimeo. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to John. I'm going to make him the presenter. John, are you ready?
I am. I'm ready and ready to go.
Take it away, John.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mary, for that lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you online. I see a bunch of names I recognize in the attendee list. I know it's a challenge to take time out of your day to spend a bit of time learning, but it's always really exciting to do this live. It's a little more special than watching a recorded tutorial. So thanks a lot for joining me. It's actually 5 a.m. where I am, so I think I'm awake now. I've had a cup of tea, and I'm feeling pretty good. So great to be back here in the webinar format. Let's get into an hour of hopefully really interesting and useful information for you. And we're going to be having a question and answer session at the end. So please stay, and let's do a bit of a jam at the end, because I think you'll find it quite worthwhile. So I'm going to be showing you, as Mary said, it's a combination of using Mocha Pro for After Effects, something that I've only just started really using, something I've always wanted to learn. But since going freelance about 10 months ago, I finally got the opportunity to really get into it. And with the release of Mocha Pro for After Effects, the plugin, wow, what a good time to get into Mocha, because it's just so useful. And I'll show you how it's really helped me with this shot. Probably couldn't really live without it now in the work that I do. Also, Sapphire and Boris Continuum together, obviously, as a team now, tag team. And that was very interesting for me to see how I could integrate both of those quite large tool sets and how it would help me with this project. So the shot we're going to look at is, because Brian asked me to do something obviously for Halloween. And I scouted over to our friends on Pond 5, and I found this long panning shot of a graveyard, because I specifically wanted to choose a shot that was going to be a little more difficult for After Effects' inbuilt trackers to handle. And obviously a shot like this, there's very few tracking points or small high contrast tracking points for a point tracker, but something that a planar tracker like Mocha Pro can handle very easily. And you can see it's a very long pan. So Mocha Pro can handle this shot really well. And I use a range of techniques. Let's just have a look at the final here. There's a lot going on in here. I've used a range of techniques. I've used sky replacement to replace the sky and add a moon. I've tracked extra elements into this shot, like this angel. And I've added lighting effects and atmosphere effects, something I really love to do. There's lots of great tools in both Boris Continuum Complete and Sapphire for those things. Color grading and replacing the grass, and also depth of field and glow effects and grunge effects. So there's lots of things going on there. And I have to say, as I was doing this, I kept, it was kind of a rolling project, because every time I rendered it out, I found something else I wanted to add, or I found something else I could do better. So I ended up rendering it out 6 times until I was happy with the final result. So I'll probably look at it today and go, oh, I could have rendered it again and changed something else. So. But that's the nature of being a motion graphics artist, isn't it? So let's talk about the final layer stack here. This is actually the final project that I'm showing you right now. You can see there's about 14 layers, and there's only a couple of pre-comps in there. But what I've done in my project is I've broken it down, as I like to do when I present, into separate compositions. So we're going to go through these one by one, and we're going to see it as a build. Every time I've added something new to the stack here, I've broken it into a comp here. So it'll make it easier to understand and also easier for me to present. And I've rendered proxies with these as well, so it just speeds things up. All right, so when you start a shot like this, let's just have a look at the final again. Oh, the original. When you look at a shot like this and you know you want to replace the sky, you've really got to evaluate the footage because, I mean, rotoscoping is great and all, and I know everyone loves doing it, and it's just a great way to spend time. Um, but
It's my absolute favorite.
That's an absolute favorite, isn't it? Yeah. Well, it would be yours. You're just like gun. Um, but you really want to keep roto work as your last resort. Okay, that's the backup. You want to do everything you can to key out as much as you can without resorting to roto. And that's the way I've always learned it, and that's always kept me in good stead. So as soon as I looked at this shot, I thought, well, first of all, I could probably try and key the sky. And obviously I can't do a color key, a green screen or blue screen, but I can do a luma key. So let's go into the stones composition, and I'm just going to turn off these effects just for a moment. So there's the shot, and I used Boris Continuum's Complete's linear luma key. Now After Effects does have, or did have a luma key effect, which is obsolete now. It does have the extract effect, but I wasn't getting a good result with After Effects' default extract effect. I couldn't quite get enough stones out. But Boris's, or BCC's linear luma key allowed me to not do such a great job at the start. Let me just go to the effect control panel. By adjusting the threshold, you can see I can do a pretty reasonable job of getting rid of most of that sky. And what does that mean? If I've got rid of most of the sky, then I have to do less roto, right? And obviously these stones, these larger sort of stones, are pretty much done. And anything you don't have to roto or track is going to be much better. But I ended up playing around with this first, and this shot is actually a little bit grainy, and it's also got a little bit of compression. So I started out by using Boris Continuum Complete's noise reduction effect. And that's a good place to start because you can see if I just turn that on and off, that's really helped clean that shot up and got rid of a lot of that blockiness in there as well. I'm just going to turn that back on. And I followed that, as I often do when I'm trying to do a luma key, with a curves effect or a levels effect. You can see if I turn that on, you can see that changes how the luma key operates, because obviously the luma key is after the curves effect in the After Effects control panel. So we just turn that on and off. You can see we're not doing too badly, and that's where I got to. And you saw before when I actually didn't have the curves effect, it appeared that I had more stones keyed out, but it was also introducing a lot more of the lighter color down the bottom of the shot. So it really was a compromise. I went backwards and forwards across the entire shot until I felt that I had as many stones as I could get, and I wasn't getting too much of this mess down here at the bottom. But obviously the stones are, many of the stones still have parts missing, so they've been keyed out. So I felt that I'd got as far as I could with the keying, so obviously the next thing to do was consider rotoscope. Dun, dun, dun. And I knew that mocha could help with roto work because I have used it before in the past, but I've never used it in the Mocha Pro After Effects plugin. So let's walk through the roto steps now, and I'm going to show you why you'll realize as soon as you've finished watching this that you need to get this in your tool set too. So let's just solo the stones roto layer, and you can see there's a bunch of headstones that actually have been masked out. I'm just dragging through this composition here. There's a fair bit of masking going on there. Let me just see if I can turn the mask back on. There we go. I just toggled the mask on and off down here using this button. And there's a lot of masking going on, but obviously this is moving footage, so each of these masks individually has to be keyframed if you're going to rotoscope this manually. But Mocha just makes this, I say Mocha, but I'm still getting used to the word Mocha, so excuse me if I use them.
It's okay, you're just pronouncing it, with an Australian accent.
Yeah, but I know it's Mocha. So, because I checked. Right.
Do you know
So,
Martin calls it mocha all the time too?
does he? Well, Martin's Australian too.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go in and have a look. Well, you can see here when I select that layer that here's the Mocha Pro plugin. Now, I've used Mocha as a standalone, and for me, it was always that kind of that separation from After Effects. You have to go into a separate application. You've got to, you've got to import your footage into Mocha, and that was always a bit of a compromise in workflow. But here, by having a plugin for Mocha Pro, and this is a full version of Mocha Pro. It's not a cut down, it's a full version, but it exists as a plugin. And if I go in and I click on this big Launch Mocha Pro button, this is going to launch Mocha Pro inside of After Effects for me. Just give it a moment. And there we are. So there's my shot. Didn't have to do anything other than click that button. It's taken my shot from the timeline in After Effects and loaded it in. And it was quite overwhelming for me when I first saw Mocha. Obviously, any new application can be a little overwhelming. But the thing with this sort of thing is just to take baby steps. And you can learn all of the buttons, as time goes by. So what I've got here is I've got these large splines in my scene. And these are actually the tracking splines. So the trick here is, obviously this is a panning shot and very difficult with a normal point tracker, because as soon as a point goes out of the frame, then you've got to find some sort of other point and you've got to sort of join them together. With Mocha Pro, I can do one big track by adding splines. So what I mean by that is, and I'm not going to do this step by step, I'm just going to show you what I did. I added a mask, or added a spline, and then I clicked to track that spline. So I came down and I clicked the tracking button down here, track forwards. And when that spline had reached the far left-hand side of the image, or of the footage, I basically clicked this button here, and this is very important. I clicked Add X Spline to Layer. And when I clicked that, I added a new mask around another object that's pretty much on the same plane as this stone here, and then just kept tracking, and the first spline just goes straight out the side of the composition, and it's picked up by the next spline. So you're basically making a giant tracking spline out of multiple splines. Once that stone got towards the left, I added another new stone, and so on and so forth. And you can see here, this is interesting because my first track was very solid, but it was a little bit shaky towards the end. And I got Martin from Imagineer Systems. Martin's the product manager. That's correct, isn't it? Is that correct? Martin's the product manager?
Yes, of course.
Mary?
Martin is the product manager.
And Martin's obviously a gun at this. And what Martin did was he created a different track, and he created much bigger areas of sky included in his track. So I'm learning all the time when I see this kind of thing. You can see here's Martin's spline here. Mine is actually around the stones here and here.
So do you know why we do that?
Well, because Mocha Pro tracks pixels, areas of pixels, right, Mary? So
patterns of pixels.
Patterns of pixels, right? So and what happened was that Martin's track was much more solid than mine. Mine was not really tracking a lot of this area around these stones. Can you enhance that?
I sure can. So the reason that it tracks better is because it actually needs those edges. When you actually do a spline that's really tight on the edges and try to track, Mocha's not able to track as well, because what it does is it calculates how that pattern is moving in 3D space. It's a 2.5D track is what we call it. And since it's tracking that pattern of pixels, that edge will help it differentiate between foreground pixels and background pixels. So it'll actually ignore pixels that aren't moving like the main plane.
Right. So there you go. So watching, and this is a really good, important thing to remember, is if it's not working, ask questions. It's such a great community. You've got people like Mary online who are really helpful. And don't sit here pulling your hair out thinking it's okay. It's supposed to be really solid, but it's not. ask a question. And I did, and I couldn't believe the difference in the track that I got, simply because I made, or Martin made the splines larger. But you can see now that I've just got Martin's spline selected, and it goes right across the shot from left to right. So that's all the tracking data. And it was as simple as that, just drawing splines. So once you've got the tracking data, then what do you do with it? Well, this is where it really accelerates the rotoscoping process. And there are a number of stones that obviously needed to be rotoscoped. Obviously, I'm not going to rotoscope the bottom of the stones because they've already been keyed out. Some of them do need to have the whole stone keyed, but some of them only needed the top. So what I did was I came back to the beginning of my timeline, and I just checked out my stones, which ones needed to have the extra masking, the roto mask, and I just grabbed the X-spline tool and clicked to draw a spline around the object. So let's just try that, because one of the stones that I saw in my final render was missing a little bit of the top of it, and it was this stone here. So I'm going to grab my X-spline tool, and I'm going to click. I'm just going to turn off the track visibility just for a moment, and also the stones. And you can see here, actually, in the layer control panel, I love to keep things organized. I've actually put all my stone splines inside a folder called stones, and I put all my tracks inside a folder called tracks, just to keep things organized. And you saw how easy it was for me to turn all of those splines off at once. So once again, grab my X-spline tool, and I just need to zoom in. Just going to hold down the Z key and the right mouse button and just zoom in.
Can I make one point about tracking while you're doing that?
Sure.
So when you're tracking a shot like this, if this had a lot of parallax or overlap, we had a question about that. And one of the things I want to point out is if you always track from the foreground to the background and you stack your layers from the foreground objects all the way to the background objects, the foreground objects at the top and the background objects at the bottom, you'll always have holdout mats for all of your tracks as you continue to make them. And that'll make tracking a whole lot easier.
That stacking order is really important, isn't it, Mary? Because if it's not at the top, then it won't be a holdout mat.
Exactly.
Okay, so there's my spline. So all I have to do now, obviously if I move the time indicator, it's going to move, it's going to stay there, and this is where you get into After Effects world where you have to set keyframes manually. Move the time indicator, move the spline. But here all I have to do, obviously once I've named it, very important not to have 200 layers named layer 1, 2, 3, 4. I just call this stone, I think it's stone 20. And change the color, just because I can, just to keep it organized. And all I have to do is select that layer, come down to where it says link to track, and choose link to main track, because I've named my track main track. And now you can see if I move the time indicator, that tracks along with the track. How cool is that? That already saves you a ton of time. And obviously if there's any slipping or sliding, all I have to do, I don't have to sort of turn keyframing on. I just have to move the time indicator and just adjust the spline. And you can see here when I do that, it automatically sets a keyframe. So it really is a really beautifully streamlined process for creating your roto splines. And obviously I had to do a lot of them, but I sat here on a Saturday afternoon, put some music on, and literally just drew the masks around the stones that I needed to add back in and linked them to the track and just added a couple of keyframes. You can see here if I select the stones, and you can see there's a few keyframes for some of them. And these are all based on my original track as well, not Martin's track. But very, very simple, like 3 keyframes for that entire 16-second shot. Whereas in After Effects, you'd be placing a lot more. So super, super simple to do rotoscoping with the assistance of Mocha Pro.
It's true. I have one more point I want to make, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So another person asked one thing, and this is a fundamental thing in Mocha, which is what's the difference between the spline and the track? Okay, the spline is actually where the track is looking, and it actually follows the tracking data, not the other way around. So the track jumps ahead and then pulls the spline along with it as it finds that texture in frames after. Okay, the surface tool is always going to tell you what the track is doing. The spline can be hand animated along with the track for rotoscoping purposes, and the thing about that is the spline will lie to you about what the track is doing. So if you want to see whether or not your track is accurate, you must turn the surface tool on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I didn't
Perfect.
need to, and I obviously learning as well. I was presuming that because I wasn't actually comping something in the scene that I was tracking, perhaps tracking some carvings onto the gravestone, that I wouldn't need the surface tool. But obviously, it's actually a quite useful tool, Mary, for checking your track.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So I'm always learning. It's wonderful. This is such a great thing to be actually using Mocha Pro now. It's such a cool little app. Okay. Anything else you wanted to add, Mary?
Oh no, I just wanted to answer somebody's question right quick while we were going over that because I figured that's a sticking point in Mocha for a lot of users.
Okay. So let's just I'm just going to cancel out of that now just by closing the window and not saving. Let's have a look at back in After Effects what we can do with that information. So I'm just going to just disable my mask for a moment, and there's only a few settings over here in the Effect Control panel for Mocha Pro, but they're very, very useful. So first thing I can do is I can view the matte, which is great. I don't have to render anything out and bring it into After Effects. I can instantaneously view the matte, and if I click on it, you'll notice nothing happens. Okay, and I've realized that that'll happen because I've got other effects applied in the effect stack. I also want to turn off my masks. Here's a little shortcut. Notice when I actually opened up the layer in the timeline that I've got all of these layers open. And you'll find yourself scrolling up and down. I'm sure you guys do it sometimes. What you can do is come to the top. I'm just going to scroll back up here to the top. You can see how annoying that is. Just hold down the Control or Command key and close the layer. And when you open it again, it'll be closed. Okay? And all of those masks will be closed. A really nice way to close lots of layers all at once. So I want to just turn all of these masks off. I'm going to just do it the brute force way just by selecting them and choosing none. Okay. So now I want to view my matte. And there you go. So you can see it's showing me the matte. And if you've just got one single thing you've rotoscoped and you just want to have a quick matte, there you go. Everything's live. You don't have to render it out. If you've got to go back and change that, you can go back and change it, and it updates and it's live. It's one of the key features of this plugin version of Mocha Pro. Notice it's also giving me all of the tracking splines as well, which obviously is not so good. That's a crazy looking gravestone. What I can do is I can click on visible layers, and I can choose which layers I want to see and which ones I don't, which is great. Just going to close that up now. And obviously I can invert the mask and feather the masks. But in this case, I didn't use the matte. I've got a lot of mattes in there because I wanted to get hold of the masks because I knew I wanted to use this across multiple compositions because I knew I'd be pre-composing. And if I didn't use masks, then I'd be duplicating this Mocha Pro instance, and then I'd have a bunch of Mocha Pro across my project, and then I wouldn't know which one was the one I used originally. So this actually is one of the really great things about Mocha Pro is that all of your roto and masking can be done in one instance of the plugin. So even if the data is copied to other layers and the plugin's turned off, you can just keep it in the comp, and that ensures that the Mocha project's going to be saved inside of After Effects along with it. You haven't got to sort of find the Mocha project somewhere else if you haven't saved it in the same directory. Fantastic. Okay, so let's just turn all of those masks back on. I'm just going to undo this. Anything you'd like to add there, Mary?
No, I think you're covering it.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've had the Luma key and we've got the roto, and you can see now that's starting to give me a pretty nice matte. Now you can see I clicked on this button down here, show channel and color management settings. If we hold down the Alt key, you can see the matte. Just little shortcuts in After Effects are going to save you a bunch of time. So it's a pretty clean matte. We've got a fair bit of rubbish down here at the bottom. We talked about that before. And there's a few little bits and pieces down here at the bottom as well. There's a few sort of spots of black. But there's a couple of ways I could have fixed this. I could have gone in and just added a few more stones, did a bit more roto work. But sometimes you just want to use a mask, just a soft feathered mask. You can see if I just turn off the matte and turn on the roto, there we go, and turn on the luma key. All that does is it just adds this sort of soft feathering at the back of the stones, and it's supposed to be a foggy night anyway, so it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of sort of fall off here, but it does a pretty good job at hiding a lot of that mess. So you've got to think about, if it looks right, it is right. It doesn't matter if you've spent 100 hours doing extra roto, or you've just created one layer and put a feathered mask on it. You've got to think smart about how you're doing it. So that's basically the shot prepared, it didn't take long at all. Literally took me a few hours to get that done. And once you've got the shot, got the sky removed, then you've got a lot of flexibility about how you can replace it, and obviously everything's going to look good. Let's just close that one up and come back to the project. All right, so let's talk about the background. Obviously, wanted to put a moon and stars in the background, and of course, I could have used stock footage or stock imagery. But being a Sapphire user, and more specifically a Sapphire 10 user, I knew that Sapphire had a wonderful effect called S Lunar, which is a brilliant moon effect, and that works beautifully in conjunction with Sapphire's night sky effect. So let's take a look at the background. So this is the pre-render, this is the proxy. You can see there's a beautiful glowing moon in the background, and it's got some smoky haze around the moon. And we've got this lovely starry sky in the background, and you can see it's moving from left to right. Now, this is actually something that everyone can chime in on, because obviously and especially you, Mary, obviously the shot is a very extreme pan from left to right, and I couldn't track the moon in there because there was no parallax. So I really took creative license with how much the moon would move in the scene. I had no idea how much the moon would move if the camera was moving like that, and how far the moon would move. So I actually ended up adding a transform effect to an adjustment layer and just setting a couple of keyframes for position. You can find transform in the effect menu under distort, which is of all places, transform, and it's great for just adding some position keyframes to all of the layers because it's an adjustment layer. So I just put a little bit of fake parallax in with my moon. Do you have a thought about that, Mary?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's totally fine. If you don't have the detail to track, you simply don't have the detail to track. What some people will do is they'll try to generate a 3D scene and put it further back in the shot, but honestly, I don't know that that's really necessary, especially for something like this. When the parallax is so simple, a hand animation is enough to cover it. If you did have more detail, or if you had some background objects, what you could do is you could really crank up the contrast, and you could try to find a background cloud or something, and then have the moon move along with that with a mocha track. But I don't think it's necessary for this shot. It's a very simple pan.
And also the moon is quite large in the scene, so there's a lot of creative license with this.
Of course.
But I just think it's worth thinking about, everyone, because even though it isn't necessarily wrong to have the moon stationary in the shot, it can look weird. So adding a little bit of movement to the moon can just help. So it's worth thinking about those kind of things.
Absolutely.
And one of the reasons I had to do another re-render, of course, because all of my renders the moon was stationary. Then I went, oh, it looks better moving.
Yeah, it
Okay,
makes it look more realistic. And again, like you said earlier, as long as it looks right, it is right. This is visual
absolutely.
effects.
Yep. So let's take a look at how it was built. So for this, I've used the Lunar plus the Night Sky effect. I'm going to right click down here at the bottom and choose Reveal Composition in Project, and just going to turn off the proxy. For those of you who don't know what proxies are, if I right click on a layer, I can choose Create Proxy, and I've chosen to create a movie, just at a high resolution version of it, just so that it's pre-rendered. So what happens when you do that, you can see on the right hand side here in the effect control in the project panel that this is the proxy and this is the footage. So when I turn that back on, you can see now we're looking at the proxy, now we're looking at the footage. Okay, so let's go into the effect control panel, and you can see here I have an instance of Sapphire effect. Now, Sapphire effect is a wonderful tool that was introduced in a few versions ago in Sapphire. And rather than talk about it, let's just click on Load Preset. By applying Sapphire effect, I get the opportunity to load a preset, and this launches the Sapphire effect browser. And in here, I can view the presets by groups. I can view by effects. I can also, in version 10, view all of the brand new builder effects, which have previously been a little bit difficult to find in the preset browser. And I have actually over 500 presets in Sapphire that I've created now. So if you do use Sapphire, just type in the word John in the search and you'll see all of my presets too. And obviously they're all brilliant because I made them. And you can also click on the New button. This is terrific because this will show you what's new in version 10. So much more discoverable now in Sapphire version 10. But I've searched for my effect already and I've actually given it a star, and this puts it in my favorites. And this is one that I created for Sapphire 10. This is Moon Behind Branches. And this is Sapphire Night Sky with a moon. You recognize that. And this is using Sapphire Zap, which is a lightning effect, as some trees. There's a really creative ways to use Zap, and we're going to look at that in a moment in this column. So I actually just going to cancel that now. I started with that preset, and presets are a great way to start. Never discount presets, especially with this kind of thing. You come in, take a look at a preset which can get you some of the way there and modify it. And it's exactly what I did. So if I come in now and click Edit Effect, it's going to launch the effect builder, and we'll see how this particular preset was created. So here we are in the effect builder, and I tell you what, when I first saw nodes, nodes inherently kind of scary, but they really do save a lot of time, and these ones are super easy to use. So what have we got here? Let me just use my right mouse button just to move around. The actual preset itself I built it in two parts. I'm just going to put it back together again so that we can see. So I'm going to take this side over here, which is the sky and the moons and the moon and the clouds, and this side over here, which is the branches. I'm just going to take my gradient and patch it across to the layer and put that back into the result. And there we go. So if I just come down here, you can see I've got Preview Selected Node checked. So let's take a look at this. So I started off with Night Sky. There's a Night Sky effect, and you can see here's all the parameters over here on the right. And for this, I think I just used the default settings. And next to that, there's a Clouds node. So this is using S Clouds. Oh, sorry, what is it? S Clouds. I get confused with the fractal noise sometimes. Using S Clouds. And what I've done for the Night Sky, I've used the crop effect, and the crop effect can be found down here under Tools. And I've cropped the sky to just the stars to just the top of the frame, and I've used the crop effect for clouds, and I've cropped that out on the bottom as well. So what that gives us, if I combine that into the Sapphire layer effect just by dragging into the foreground and background, and using the screen blend mode, that gives us this nice night sky. Because I didn't want too many stars right down behind the gravestones. Now, underneath that, I've used the Sapphire Luma effect, and Luma's a really nice high resolution image of the moon, and it's completely adjustable. Lunar phase, all kinds of different things you can do with S Luna to zero in on just the sort of moon look that you like. And beneath that, I've used the Sapphire gradient effect, and you can see I've used a start color and an end color, which give me sort of like a dirty yellow. And I really like that sort of yellow moon. I thought that looked really nice. And that's just dropped underneath the lunar effect. So to add an effect in here, all I have to do is come over to the effect stack here and type in the name and just literally drag it in. And that's what I did. Okay, so that was how I got the moon and the stars, but I wanted to put some foreground elements in here, and obviously there's not a branches plugin, like foreground blurred branches plugin, so I actually use the zap effect. You can see here, if I click on branches, and I've renamed this node branches to make it more sense. You can see here, nothing's animated, but I've just used Sapphire Zap to create these upward shooting lightning bolts that look kind of like spooky branches. Now, inherently, you can't make this particular effect black by itself, and this is where the effect builder can come in really handy. What I've done is I've used a color node, and you can see it's black here, and I've used a set alpha node, and that's also under tools, set alpha, and then I patched the branches into the matte port of set alpha. So what that gives me is black lightning. And if I come up to the view menu and choose show checkerboard, there we go, nice black lightning. And I didn't know how I was going to do that.
John, this is Brian here. I just want to jump in. A fantastic use of Builder here. I mean, this is really like excites me to really see like the power of Builder, where you're able to take, first of all, something like Zap, and obviously it's a lighting effect, so Zap can never be black, but you're able to achieve a black effect within Builder. Just great use of Builder with that effect.
Thanks, Brian. And this is one of the fundamental keys of the effect builder. It allows you to take an effect and create a new effect. So I can borrow parameters from other effects and link them together. And I'm not going back into After Effects and creating a black solid and then creating a Luma matte or an alpha matte, which is 2 layers. Everything's actually just a preset, a single effect inside of the builder, which I can also save as a preset, by the way. And that's going to be available to different platforms that use Sapphire as well. So very handy. Beneath that, I've just used the Sapphire rack defocus effect just to give us a little bit of foreground blur. And then I've just taken the Sapphire layer effect and just patched them both in. So, and I didn't necessarily know I was going to start with this particular look, but it's so easy to experiment with this that this is where I arrived. And in the end, it looks really quite complicated, but you can see it's actually really simple. So I used this preset as a beginning, but I knew I didn't need the branches in the background because I wanted them later in the process. So what I did was I just literally unlinked, and then just linked that back in. And if we just turn off previous selected node, that's what I got. So I'm just going to cancel that, and you can see that's what I have. Notice also that I only have a certain amount of parameters in the effect control panel. I've just made visible from inside the builder which parameters I want to see by soloing those parameters. So you can really create truly custom effects using Sapphire Effect Builder. Okay, so at this point, if I come back to let's come back to the project panel and come back to the background. At this point, it looks something like this, which looks really crazy. It looks like the graveyard is on some kind of small asteroid and we're floating out in space, which doesn't look particularly convincing unless that's the look you're going for. So I knew I had to somehow match this background sky or fog with the background here. And this is where I used a gradient. So created a new layer, and just use Sapphire gradient. You can see I've actually used the ink dropper tool just to match that color. It's the exact same color as is in the clip. And if we come back to the background here, you can see that looks much better. Because I knew I was going to color grade this later, but I just needed to make sure at this point everything looked integrated. And as you do, when you're reviewing your notes, you realize there's actually an even better way to do this. Obviously, I've just showed you Sapphire Effect Builder and how you can stack effects to get looks without using multiple layers in After Effects. So as soon as I was preparing for this, I realized, oh yeah, I could have done that inside the builder. So let's show you how you can do that. It's actually a really good little technique. So let's just say you've done this and you realize you want to go into Builder. How do you get this effect into this Builder setup? I'm going to show you. So if I come into S Gradient, I'm going to save this as a preset. So I'll call this, let's see, Graveyard Gradient. I can give it a description and give it some characteristics and stuff, but I'm not going to in this case. I'm just going to click Save. And now I can come into Lunar and Night Sky and click Edit Effect. And once again, that's going to launch the builder. Keep in mind, I'm on a very old 2009 Mac Pro here. It's getting very old in the tooth, long in the tooth. Okay, so now I'm back in the builder. What I can do now is I can come up to the Node menu and choose Insert Node from Preset. So that's going to launch the preset browser. Gives me a chance just to have a drink of water. Here we go. And once again, come over here to search, because that's the best way to find things, and type in Grave, or Grieve, if I could spell. G-R-A-V-E. Graveyard, Gradient Art, okay? I have an excuse because you're not supposed to be able to spell this early in the morning.
No, so it's completely too early.
Yeah, that's how we spell it in Australia. So let's click Load. Okay, so now you can see that's because I had this one selected, this gradient, it's actually added it into the effect stack, and there it is. So you can build looks with single effects inside of After Effects or inside of Premiere Pro or your other hosts, and that support the builder, and then you can save that as a preset, then you can load that in to the builder. So now I can save that as a single look. I could come up here and to the File menu and choose Save as Effect. So anytime I need a spooky, foggy, misty night sky, I know I've got that look.
But that's really the power of presets. Like that right there is the power of presets. You have that over and over and over for every project.
That's right, and it's always going to be with your, it's installed with Sapphire, so, as long as you copy it across, if you, move machines, or you can share it with somebody else, as long as they install it, they've got access to exactly what you've created.
Exactly, and it's really good for sister shots, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great to point out all those presets, too, are cross-platform as well, John, so if you were to, create a night sky and you were, working in an offline scenario, creating some graphics for an Avid, you can just share that preset, and with the power of Builder, it really doesn't matter to us. You can be in Avid, you can be in Premiere, and that preset you created is going to look exactly the same.
Absolutely, yeah, so useful. Okay, so what have we got now? So we've got the background and the stones done. Every time I say the stones, I think of the Rolling Stones, of course. Let's go into this one here, Angel. So you can see there's the look now. It's looking much better. And when I was at this stage, I was thinking, well, the stones are all nice, good and everything. There's some interesting shapes. But wouldn't it be great if I could just add something even more interesting in there? And I grabbed this royalty-free image from a website called Pixabay, P-I-X-A-B-A-Y. And I just did a search for free imagery. And it's a great shot of an angel statue, and I actually just cut that out in Photoshop. They call that deep etching, for those of you who don't know. So if you ever hear the word deep etching, it basically just means cutting something out. And because I had my tracking data, I was able to drop that into the scene. So let's just turn off the proxy. So there's my angel. And I want to show you now a couple of different ways that you can access the tracking data inside of After Effects once you've created it. So now, when Martin helped me with this, he actually used the first method, which is to export the tracking data from directly within the Mocha Pro plugin. So you can see if I press the U key on the keyboard, I have position, scale, and rotation data. So let's come back to the background because I've only got one instance of the roto. And if I come up to click on Launch Mocha Pro, so what Martin did was he exported that tracking data. So I'm selecting the main track layer. And here's another thing that I actually learned. When Martin did the track, see, I had a problem at the end of my track where at the very, very end here, there's a little bit of camera shake up and down. And all of my rotor splines and the angel statue were all jumping up and down. And Martin had redone the track, and that was great. It helped. But what he did was he created another layer at the end here. He called this check layer. So he created this big spline at the very end of the track, and he linked that to the main track. And that's the information that he chose to export. So he says it's export tracking data down here. And by choosing a spline, even though it's linked to the main track, by choosing it at the end of the track, it got a much smoother result. Can you add anything to that, Mary?
I mean, you can always smooth things out with expressions and things like that, but honestly, it's easier to smooth things out by just doing a better track if you have any problems. For rotoscoping, it's honestly sometimes just easier to animate the spline to smooth things out.
Yeah, and I think Martin mostly made this spline, he made it with a grid effect, just to check what was happening at this end of the track. Because obviously what's happening at the left-hand side isn't necessarily what's going on, camera shake-wise and stuff at the right-hand side.
Sure. You can also just unlink the shape from the track and have everything that reads underneath it give you tracking data as an average for the entirety of all the pixels moving inside of that shape, and that can be really handy for panning shots as well.
Okay, so there's a lot of depth in here and a lot of ways to really fine-tune, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly.
Okay, so but what Martin did, I wanted to leave this in because I was learning as well, and I wanted to teach you what I had learned. So Martin created this extra layer called check layer, and he chose to export the tracking data from that. And for that, he just chose this option here, After Effects Transform Data, Position, Scale, and Rotation. So he copied that to the clipboard, and I'm just going to close this up. Don't save. He created a new null object, and then he pasted that in. So we come back to Angel, and he pasted that onto this null object, and this is what gave him the keyframes. So once the keyframes are in there, then it's a really simple case of adding objects to the scene, like I did for this angel, and then just using the pick whip under the parent column, and then just linking it, just like that. So that's one way that you can create a link between layers and create your tracking data. But there's also another way, and this is more specific to the Mocha Pro plugin. And I wanted to show you this as well, because this has certain flexibility. So I've got another angel in here. So if I click on this angel, you can see it's basically exactly the same. But this angel's linked to a different null. This is this one here, tracking data create. Because what I've done is I've chosen to create the tracking data. Let's just come back to I think I've actually got it installed. I've got a version of the Roto Mocha Pro here. Because remember, I've duplicated these compositions to show you as a build the project, but I actually only had one inside the project for the final project that I was working on. So here, so what I can do is come over to the Mocha Pro effect, come down to tracking data, and I can click on create tracking data. So you can create tracking data directly from within the plugin. And when I did that, if I just press the U key, and once again just twirl up all of those guys, with the Command key held down, come down to Effects, Mocha Pro, and you can see here under Tracking Data, I've turned off the top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right information because I'm not doing any corner pinning, but you can see I've kept the center, rotation, scale X, and scale Y data. And I've used expressions to link that to the null. So let me just make this a little larger for you. And look at the null. Now if I press E on the keyboard, I can solo the expressions. And there you go. So what I've done is for the rotation, I've dragged the pick whip down to rotation. For the scale, I've dragged the pick whip down to scale X because scale X and scale Y are the same. And for the position, I've dragged the pick whip down to the center parameter. And that has given me exactly the same result as if I'd exported the data directly from within Mocha Pro and copied and pasted it. So why would you do one above the other? Well, I've learned that obviously if you do it this way, then and you want to go in and change the track, then you can go and change the track and then just click Create Tracking Data again. It's going to update. So it's live basically, which is great. It means you don't have to go and copy and paste the details or the parameters. Do you have anything to add to that, Mary?
No, I think that's fairly accurate. You know, the flexibility of it is that you always have access to your file right away. The other thing that I would add to that, though, if I had to, was that the plugin is specific to linking up with your files properly. When you copy and paste, one of the things that you can do often as a user is you can be offset. So you'll be like 10 frames in and you hit paste. Obviously, then your paste is going to be 10 frames off. So
Yes.
this is a little bit more foolproof, especially if it's, 5 a.m. in Australia or 2 a.m. and you're working, or it's 11 and you're still working, that kind of thing.
Nobody works at 2 a.m. Not me. I'm too old.
Uh-huh.
Only 4 a.m. But absolutely, I mean, you can see I've got my time indicator here at 9 seconds now. Probably 99% of the time, you're not going to have your time indicator at the beginning of your comp. There's going to be somewhere else because you're dragging through and you're working along, and you're going to paste it, and you're going to go, well, why doesn't it match? Because all your keyframes have been pasted at that point.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, so once the data was there, I could, obviously, I could parent the angel to the null, and this is why I didn't actually put the information directly on the angel, because once it's parented to a null, I could experiment with where the angel was in the scene. So I could, drag it over here, I could drag it over there, and I didn't have to mess up my keyframes. So now I can have two angels. Must have been a really important person who was buried here. Maybe Siamese twins. Okay, so that's probably not very politically correct now, actually. Sorry about that. Right, so we've done the angel. We've seen the tracking data. Let's go on to the next composition. Next is the title. So there's obviously many different ways to create titles in After Effects, 3D titles. And you've got Cinema 4D, I use it all the time. You've got After Effects' own 3D tools. You've got some great tools in BCC, Boris Continuum Complete. Got Element 3D, very popular. A lot of different ways to do it. I wanted to quickly show you, and I wanted to do this for my own purposes as well, using After Effects 3D type, using the new Cinema 4D renderer. So this is the latest version of After Effects, and After Effects 14. And you can see here under renderer, there's now an option for Cinema 4D renderer. Before it was just ray traced and classic 3D, but with the new Cinema 4D renderer, you can use 3D. You actually use 3D in After Effects to create logos and titles, and not have to have any CUDA acceleration. It really is that good. So let me just show you here. I've got this. I've got my text, which is this graveyard, and let's just see what's going on here. Yes, I've got white text, and you can see it's live text and it's moving around pretty fast. I'm going to turn a couple of lights on. For this, I used a backlight. So I positioned a backlight approximately where the moon is in the scene. And you can see, by the way, the text is also linked to the same tracking data. So as the track moves along, or as the pan is happening, the text moves into the scene, which is great. So once you've got that tracking data, you can link whatever you want. And notice how, because the light is stationary, when I move the time indicator, obviously the light is the angle of the light's changing on the text, which is a nice thing. If I track the light as well, of course, the light wouldn't move relative to the text. So that's really nice. So the text is moving into the scene and it's being illuminated by that light, or being illuminated by the moon. And you can see how responsive this is. If I click on this little spanner here, here's the new Cinema 4D render options, and I haven't got this on draft. I've got this on typical. And if I move that up a little bit, you can see if I move it across, it moves from geometry to best. Those of you who use Cinema 4D will appreciate these settings. It's the same in Cinema 4D with the standard renderer. You have geometry and best settings. Let me just bring this right up to here. And you can see it's already ready to go. Those of you who've used the Ray Trace 3D render, and obviously I've got no reflections in here, but if you've used a Ray Trace 3D render in After Effects in the past and you haven't got CUDA acceleration, you're going to be here for a couple of minutes before that frame redraws. So finally, we have access to actually usable 3D inside of the latest version of After Effects, which is fantastic. I'm just going to bring that back just for the sake of the exercise back to geometry. And I added a couple more lights. You can see here, I've called this one Spec Light because it's mostly working on the specular. For the actual text, I just press AA. I can see the options under the text. And I've actually increased the specular intensity and shininess right up to 100. I didn't want this to be too diffuse and too bright, but I wanted the specular to really pop out. So I increased those values and then just created this spec light. Once again, pressing AA, you can see the intensity is 30 and it's a very pale yellow. So I'm colorizing my text with lights. And just duplicated that again, and once again press AA. You can see that's 15 intensity, so a little less and slightly more rich yellow. So that's giving me the illumination at the front of the text and the back, and also colorizing my text. So it's a really nice way to work. And notice the text without the light is white. Boom. It threw me for a moment because I thought it was a matte, so I confused myself. Okay, so let's just turn back on the other layers. And thank you, Apple. I don't want to install anything. Remind me tomorrow. I always say remind me tomorrow.
Because it really wants you to.
It really does want me to, yeah. Okay, we'll get rid of that. So even though I've said tomorrow, it says tomorrow. Good. Okay. So there we are. There's the text inside the scene with the background. And it still doesn't look very well comped, but we'll get to that point. Obviously, first of all, I need to position the text within the scene, and that's not necessarily by moving the text back in Z space. All I've done is I've created a mask for the foreground stone inside of Mocha Pro, and if I just solid that layer, you can see I've comped that over the top. So I've dropped that foreground stone over the graveyard layer, and obviously when the text goes past, actually don't even see that. I think I did that originally because I had the text. I had the text passing behind the foreground stone, but there you go. I've just reviewed this now, and I've realized that I've actually repositioned the text towards the end of the comp, so I didn't even need that. So that guy can be turned off. Okay, so the next thing, but that's a good thing to keep, just getting back to, that's a good thing to keep in mind. You can see how easy it is, though, to create composites like that. Because I have that tracking data, I can very easily put photoed layers in front of layers that I've added to the scene, which is great. Let's take a look at the shadow. So I wanted to cast a shadow on the ground, and of course, obviously, this is footage, so there's no 3D information in this. So I couldn't cast it on the grass, so I had to cast it on a 3D layer. And I wanted to create a shadow catcher, so we literally just see the shadow, but we don't see the layer that the shadow is being cast upon. But the thing is, to do that inside the main comp, I have to use blend modes. And you can't use blend modes on 3D layers in After Effects. They literally don't work. They've been disabled. So I had to create the shadow inside of a pre-comp. And here it is here. You can see here's the shadow catcher layer. This is just a 3D layer that's been rotated. And above that, we have the graveyard text, but notice you can't see it. It's invisible. That's because I've set the cast shadows option for the text to only. If I just uncheck that, there's off, and there's on, and there's only. So now we only see the shadow. I've got the same backlight, and you can see I've also got the same link to the same tracking data. And this is important, even more important, because watch as I drag the time indicator, watch how the shadow changes. Obviously, the type is moving into the scene, the light is stationary, the shadow is going to change as well. And I only put this in quite late in my design because originally I didn't track the shadow with or I linked the shadow to the graveyard text, and it just sort of shifted along and didn't move. But it looks much better moving into the scene like this because the shadow changes perspective, which is great. Now for the shadow catcher layer, I just press UU. You can see here under material options, I've got appears in reflections off, but I've also, more importantly, got accepts lights off. Watch if I turn this on. If I turn that on, you can see that that's now accepting the light from that light, and you can see it's not pure white. But by turning accepts lights off, now we get a nice black and white matte. And because this is in a pre-comp, this is something in the main comp that I can use with blend modes. And you can see I've set the multiply blend modes. Let's just go towards the end, turn this on, and turn the multiply blend mode off. And there we go. You can see I've changed the opacity somewhat, but with the multiply blend mode, now I've removed that white background, and because it's exactly the same text, it's going to be looking in exactly the right position. So that's how I did the shadow. Okay, let's move on to the next composition. So once I got to this point, then I thought, well, it'd be nice to have something more spooky in the background, and this is where I hit on the idea of using Zap. And we've already looked inside of Sapphire Effect Builder. Let's come back to the Effect Control panel and click Edit Effect. And you'll recognize that. That's just the section from the preset that I had, the moon behind branches, but I've just isolated it inside its own effect. And notice here, never before it was black. Let's just turn off Show Checkerboard. Now it's that same color as the actual background. I've sampled the color from the background, and that's just over here by clicking on the color swatch and then just choosing that color. So now we have these branches. And one thing I'm going to mention to you is I've actually set keyframes inside of After Effects for this. And we're going to look at those in a moment. We can delete the rack defocus node. I've set keyframes inside of After Effects. If you didn't do that, you could just select the node and you can use these auto animation options, which are terrific if you want to not bother with keyframes in After Effects. I didn't do that. I set keyframes in After Effects. And one thing you need to know, After Effects users, and this is something, Brian, you might chime in on. If I was to click OK now and go back into After Effects, I would lose both these keyframes. I would lose the keyframes parameters, or the keyframes for the parameters that I have animated. And that's a little bit of a gotcha. So you have to be aware that if you set something up in the builder and you keyframe it, then you go back and make changes inside the builder, you will lose your keyframes. I'm going to cancel that.
Yeah, that's definitely a great point to point out, John, and something that we're going to work hard to fix, I will say.
Yeah, it hasn't. It's not a deal breaker. As long as I know that it happens, it's not a problem. But it can be a little bit of a go. Oh, where do my keyframes go when you first use it?
Yep, it has actually bitten me personally in the past, so I am very sensitive towards it.
But there's a lot of things happening with Effect Builder that no other effect has actually achieved yet. So obviously there's going to be some integration challenges in that respect. So notice here, I've set keyframes for curve, amplitude, and length. And I've also linked it to that tracking layer. So it's going to track in behind the stones, and at a certain point, the length of the zap branches is going to grow. So it's a spooky growing tree. And I've also adjusted the curve amplitude. And what the curve amplitude does is it fans out the branches. You can see that like that. Really nice. This is, if you're going to use lightning, you know, this is like lightning on steroids. This is the bee's knees as far as lightning effects, which of course I didn't use for lightning. So if we stick that behind and just turn everything else on.
John, you're like a Zap master here. Like, it really is crazy to see like what you achieve with this lightning plugin, and it's great
like
for us.
Zen in the art of Zap, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's great to see that you're like, the stuff you create with Zap is completely, was never intended on our part when we wrote it, but that's really kind of like the beauty of a Sapphire effect, is it really is so deep. You can just achieve so many results from one effect. You know, we start with a lightning effect and you end up with branches. So great.
Totally. And you've got to check out some of the presets, everyone, because there's a load of great presets in there. Okay, so I've got the branches behind, and there's a layer above it called Lunar Shader, and I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to explain what that is. Obviously, as the branches grow up in the scene, they grow by animating the length. They go in front of the moon, and that was on purpose. I wanted them to grow in front of the moon. But I noticed when I was doing it that because the moon's quite bright and these branches are bright, it was disappearing in front of the moon, especially with the glow effects on. So what I've done is, if I just solder that, I've used a second version of Sapphire Lunar, and I've just made it basically by adjusting the settings into a big soft sphere almost. And I've put that behind in front of the zap, and I've used this option here, and if I can just zoom in, I think I can. Yep, zoom in down here. I've used this option down here, preserve transparency. You can see here, if I click on it, it says preserve transparency at the top. And when I click that, because these are at the bottom of the stack, you're only going to see the moon or the lunar layer in the branches. So basically the layers below act as like a cookie cutter. And you can see if I view transparency, we're only seeing that there. And because the moon's in the right place, we'll see this blue as the branches pass in front of the moon in the other comp. So let's take a look at that.
I like that you're showing little finishing tricks, you know, to show how to make this a little bit more realistic.
Oh, this is so important. So there you can see there, as the branches grow up in front of the moon, it looks a little darker. It's got a little moodier, and obviously if these are the same color as these ones here, they basically disappear. So that really helps. Okay, so next I wanted to add some environmental effects, and this is where I've added things like smoke and glow and lighting effects and all that kind of cool stuff. Once you get to this stage, the rest is just it's just cream because it's really easy. If I just click on this layer here and turn it on, this is Sapphire Stage Light. I'm just going to solo it, and Stage Light basically is a stage light. Let me just reset it. You can see it basically gives me a volumetric light, but the effect itself also has, and I love this, it's got built-in smoke. So what I've done is, if I just press U on the keyboard again, UU, I've used the built-in camera and I've just changed the zoom of the light. If I just unzoom that, you can see I've zoomed right in, and really I've just basically made some stock footage of drifting smoke, which is extremely handy. One thing I have done though is I've adjusted the gamma, because by default it can be very bright, and I've knocked that right back. So we get this very subtle smoke, because obviously a little can go a long way. And if we come back into the project panel and just turn on the proxy, it just adds a little bit of drifting smoke. And you can see, by the way, with the lunar effect, there is also smoke. I didn't mention that. Lunar has built-in atmosphere, so you can see that there's a little bit of extra smoke passing in front of the moon as well. So with that combination of smoke on lunar and the smoke from the stage light effect, we're starting to add some nice atmospheric effects in there. Very subtle, but you can look at the final render and see how that looks. We've got a link to the final render for you. So next was the grade. Obviously, the shot is very bright. Color grading is going to be a very important step. And the first thing I did was use Sapphire. I used Boris Continuum Complete's three-way color grader. And if I just turn that on, you can see this goes a long way to giving me a much better look. And it really was just a very simple case here of leaving the gamma pretty much, well, sorry, actually adjusting the gamma. I left the gain as it was, and I dragged the gamma value all the way over to the sort of bluey green, and I dragged the lift, which is the highlights, more over towards a yellow, and that's the look that I got. I also adjusted the saturation. I knocked the saturation right back to 28, and you can see if I turn it on and off, looking really good.
Yeah, that's a pretty night and day difference.
It is, isn't it? So next I used, because I saw the grass was quite blue, and I really wanted to give the grass a little bit of color, just to add some variation. And obviously, if I just go and add a mask over the top, I'm going to colorize the bottom of all these stones, and that's exactly what I did to start with. And I thought, well, hang on, I've got all this tracking data. Why don't I just use that? So for this, I created some masks inside of Mocha Pro, and you can see I've just linked those to my track, and I've just masked out the bottoms of the stones. So if we have a look at the layer here, you can see that's the grass. Really super simple to get the grass cut out. Once I had the sky all sorted out with the track, getting the grass was child's play. But to that I've added the curves effect. And if we just turn on the rest of the layers, you can see without curves, without the curves effect, I had that, which is not really doing anything. So I've used curves, and you can see how it's brown. I was also using the fast film process effect. This is Boris Continuum Complete's fast film process effect. I'll just turn off the grass and turn on fast film process. And you can see these are all adjustment layers. I tend to use a lot of adjustment layers at this stage. Fast film process, I chose a preset called Twilight Time. It's kind of suitable that it was twilight, you know, vampires and all. And I literally just chose the preset. That's all I did. And I thought, hey, bing-a-da bang-a-da boom, that's what I want. This added a little bit of green in there, a little bit more yellow. But the grass still is very blue. So once I saw this sort of yellowy sky, I thought the grass could actually do some work. So that's where I used the curves effect. And you can see there, with the fast film process effect on top, the grass actually goes slightly green. And I've just put an extra mask on there with a bit of feathering on it, just to sort of feather it off so we don't have a solid sort of green all the way up to the stones in the distance. It just sort of falls off to the blue. And you could say, okay, there's a light in the foreground that's, you know, illuminating this grass a little bit more than this area here, so that's what's making it appear more green.
Well, yeah, and it's just atmospheric perspective.
Absolutely. And on top of that, I've just used, as I often do, a vignette. And I've used BCC vignette for this. And obviously that goes a long way to adding to the moodiness of this look. Okay, let's go to the next composition. I think we're getting close to time, are we, Mary?
We are over time, but we are letting you talk because this is very interesting.
Fantastic. This goes so quickly. We've only got a few more to go. Obviously, once you get to this stage, then you want to start thinking about glow and rays and, you know, light and how it works in the scene. And Boris Continuum Complete and Sapphire have an abundance of lighting effects. It's like, you know, it's almost overwhelmed by how many great lighting effects are. The problem is, which one do you choose? In this case, I've chosen one of each. I've used Sapphire's Fast Film Glow. Sorry, I'm getting them confused now because I use them both together so much. I've used Boris Continuum Complete's Fast Film Glow. And it was tricky because Sapphire glows are so good. And there's some great presets as well for Sapphire glows. But I've always liked Boris Fast Film Glow, literally because it gives me a really nice filmic glow very quickly. And you can see I'm just turning it on and off, and it's just giving me a little bit of extra glow around the moon. A little goes a long way, and you don't want to overdo it because obviously that's going to be too bright and you're going to lose a lot of detail in the moon. So a little bit of Fast Film Glow, and above that I've used the Sapphire Raise effect. So the raise effect in Sapphire is the one I always turn to. It's a terrific, clean ray, beautiful detail, very smooth and very fast. And you can see here I've created a mask in the scene. And for the Sapphire Raise effect, for matte from path, I've just chosen that mask. Now, if you have an effect that doesn't have this option, there is a way in After Effects to do a very similar thing. Under the effect, at the bottom of the effect, you can see you have compositing options. So I could click the plus key and I could choose Mask 1. And that's basically doing the same thing. It's using the mask to composite the effect, which is really handy. And I was using just that thing yesterday, and I was thinking, I'm going to speak to the After Effects team, and I'm going to ask them, please put that option up here at the top, under the preset options, because I'm always scrolling down to the bottom. Some of these effects are really long, and I'm always scrolling down to the bottom to try and find it. I'd much prefer it at the top. So keep an eye on that for the next version of After Effects, and if it's in there, you know who asked for it. Okay, so there's my rays, looking beautiful. And of course, the rays are an adjustment layer, and they're affecting everything below. And you can see I've also turned on the atmosphere setting for rays to add a little bit of smokiness in the rays. And here's the beautiful thing, especially with this zap that passes in front of the moon. As I scroll through the timeline, as things move in front of the rays, I'm just going to turn on the proxy so we can see that a little bit faster. As we move in front of the rays, you can see the rays are, let's turn off the mask, the rays are being affected by what's in front of the moon. And that's what you want. You get this nice breakup of the rays, and it really gives a lovely volumetric effect. Really nice. And I very purposely put the moon slightly behind the text. I thought that was more interesting than just leaving it over here in empty space. I felt that was balanced quite nicely. And it's just a lovely touch the way the zap just sort of creepily sort of grows up towards the end, and then it just hits those rays, and it gives you that lovely volumetric look. So nice. This is the kind of thing you do, and you sort of smile when you're working and go, oh yeah, that looks pretty cool. Okay, last a couple of finishing things. Obviously, it really helps to have a few particles in the scene. Well, we've all seen, well, I guess many of us have seen Stranger Things, and the particles that are in that.
And if you haven't seen it, you should.
What was the place they were in? The Upside Down, right?
The Upside Down.
So in the Upside Down, there's some beautiful floating particles, and I was able to emulate that. I wanted to see if I could. I was able to emulate that pretty well using Boris Continuum Complete's particles effect. This is the BCC particle emitter 3D, and I get a pretty realistic, or a pretty similar kind of look. I've got some floating clouds. One of the things I really love about this is the image collection in this particle generator. Under the image collection, you've got a huge range of different particles that you can use. And this is really useful. I just came in here and I chose the cloud white setting. And notice how the particles are sliding into the scene. Obviously, I don't want particles throughout the entire move, because the particles are going to be moving differently. The particles aren't going to be moving with the camera. So what I've done is, once again, I've linked the particle layer to the same tracking data, and I've also keyframed the particle transparency. So you can see a couple of opacity keyframes. So just towards the end of the move, they just start fading in. You hardly even notice it. But then by the end of the move, when everything's slowing down, you've got these particles floating around, because you don't want particles floating in front of a camera pan when the particles themselves aren't panning. And you get that really nice look. So if I just turn on the proxy again, only very subtle, but it's always great to have some foreground floating elements like particles just to give you that depth and that moodiness. And you can see at this stage, you can see my shadow is moving the way I expected. Everything's looking really good, except that the shadow itself is, in this particular render, is not moving with, well, it's sliding a little bit at the end. You can see how it's the shadow. You might just notice that the shadow is actually sliding. That's because I forgot to link with this render. I forgot to link the shadow to the tracking data, and you can see how that really kills the look. But once I linked that shadow to the tracking data, then it moved with the scene, and I've got in the final render that you'll see it actually does that. Okay, so, and also you'll notice the shadow is very sharp. It's way too sharp. So I fix that in the next composition, or in the next steps that I took. And I often do this. The first thing I did was I used the Sapphire's rack defocus effect, really great defocusing, fast defocusing effect. And if I just turn it on, you can see I just use a soft feathered mask, and I've just defocused that foreground area, which really helps. There's nothing really that's going to sort of wreck that illusion. There's nothing of detail in this foreground area, but you can see just by putting a little bit of depth of field just in the foreground, it instantly adds depth to this look. Now, one other thing that I've done is, at this stage, when I viewed the stones over the background, I felt that I really needed some sort of light wrap effect. And for that, I've used the BCC light wrap effect. Let's just go to a space in the timeline where we can see something in front of the moon. Maybe just back here. And you can see it's slow. That's why I rendered to proxies. Just come back a little bit more. So what the light wrap effect is, basically, in the real world, you're not going to get a perfectly sharp edge when one object's in front of another. You're going to get a little bit of sort of wrapping of color or light around. And you can see here, if I just turn it on, you can see, just turn it on and off. It's just wrapping a little bit of the light from the background layer, which I've chosen. You can see here, background. I've chosen that because it's pre-composed. So everything in the background is pre-composed. And I've used that as my background. And it's just wrapping the light from the background around those pixels. And it just gives a really, really nice look. It's much more realistic. You'll notice also that the edges of this are quite soft, and this is something I only did yesterday. And I looked in both Sapphire and BCC for an effect that I could do this, but in the end I ended up turning to an effect that I use a lot. I really love the key correct tools from Red Giant. I've used them for many years, and this particular effect is called Edge Blur. Let's just turn it off. So if I turn that effect off, you can see it's very obvious here. You can see a very aliased edge because I've done that luma key, but the masking is okay because I've added a bit of soft feather to the mask. But have a look here. If I turn Edge Blur on, it kind of now matches that luma key edge with the masked edge, and it helps that sit much better in the scene. So the compositing tools in key correct are very, very useful. I love them a lot. I'm not afraid to use many different kinds of tools. I'm not just stuck to one tool. I use whatever works.
No, that's a great point. I think I'm always saying it almost too, ad nauseum. But it's nowadays you really need almost every tool at your disposal because obviously the bar is so high for motion graphics. I think to kind of tie yourself to one little area is kind of foolish. You pretty much want everything at all times.
Absolutely. But the main thing is just do a job that that justifies it and build it into the job.
Sure.
Client pays for your plugins. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So last effect, and this is the Sapphire grunge. There you go. The Sapphire grunge effect. This is the BCC grunge effect. And I'm going to explain to you the difference between the two, actually. I've used BCC grunge for this, and the reason I use BCC grunge, and you can see if I just toggle it on and off, it's just adding a nice sort of, Walking Dead-esque kind of grungy, dirty lens effect around the edges of my composition. The reason I've used, in this particular case, BCC grunge is because BCC grunge is different from Sapphire in that BCC grunge uses actual images of grunge. So there's a bunch of presets you can use, but these are actual photographic textures, so real photographs. And in this case, I wanted that. But if I did say want to use Sapphire grunge, let's just apply it and we'll have a look. I'll type in grunge, S-grunge, and what S-grunge will do, S-grunge uses brushes, and you can see by default it has, I've got to turn the mask off, just turn that to none. By default it covers my entire image, but what I can do is I can come into load preset, and I was literally playing with this particular preset before I decided to use BCC grunge. This is a preset that Brian made for, I think it's for the latest version. This is Cold as Ice. This is one that Brian created. You can see there's his name there. And yeah, man, I kind of like
a child of the 80s, so I'm going to call something Cold as Ice.
Yeah, Foreigner, great song. So yeah, see that? Look, it wasn't quite what I was going for, but I kind of liked that this kind of gave me this foreground element. And I could blur this as well as if I wanted to, but in the end I felt that it was a little too much for what I needed. But it's great to have the choice, if you have both sets of tools, between these two different grunge effects, because they are quite different and they can be used for quite different things. So in the end, this is the final look that I came up with. Is there a link in the that the viewers can click on there?
There is, in fact.
So you can see there's a fair bit going on there, and it did take me a little while to get this looking the way that I wanted. But I'm pretty happy with the results in the end, and using a combination of great plugins and built-in After Effects tools such as the text, come up with a really nice result.
Thank you so much, John. That was a wonderful presentation. I think you answered a ton of questions.
That's great. Well, thanks everyone for spending a little bit of time with me. I'm looking forward to you joining me in a webinar again in the future.
Absolutely. We got a lot of wonderful feedback, tons of great questions. If you guys have any more questions, please go to our website, www.boriseffects.com. And also you can go to genarts.com or imagineersystems.com, and we will have tons of tutorials for you to pursue. We're going to put this webinar up within 48 hours. And John, do you have any self-plugging you want to do? You want to go ahead and plug motionworks.net?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been online for a long time. You can catch me on Twitter at Motionworks, and you can also catch me at motionworks.net. So don't be a stranger. Reach out to me. I'm not scary. I will definitely respond to you. Thanks, everyone.